Welcome to another deep dive with us.
Yeah.
Today we're going to be looking at this motivational speech called When Life Breaks You.
Okay.
And it's from a YouTube channel called Ben Lionel Scott.
Okay.
Have you had a chance to watch it?
Yeah, I watched it and it's a powerful speech.
Yeah, he's a very motivational speaker.
Yeah, he is. And what I find really interesting is how he takes this idea of resilience, which we often think of as like a superpower or something, and he makes it relatable to everyday struggles.
Yeah, right out of the gate, he's not pulling any punches. He basically says,
Right.
there are times when anything that can happen will happen.
It's like he's just acknowledging right up front that life is going to throw you curveballs.
It's not always going to be easy.
Not at all. In fact, he goes on to say that you're going to get broken.
Yeah.
Emotionally, financially, maybe even in your relationships, but that it's not about denying the pain. It's more about realizing that everyone goes through this.
That's a good point. I never thought about it like that. But he doesn't just leave us there feeling broken. He takes that idea and turns it into this turning point, this opportunity for growth.
Yeah, it's like he's reframing it. He says you can either give up and fall apart, or you can get stronger, more resilient, even better.
That's where the psychology comes in, I think.
Right.
That whole idea of cognitive reframing, as they call it.
Exactly. And he talks about these two voices that we all have inside us, battling it out when we're going through tough times.
Right.
One voice is telling you to just give up, and the other one's pushing you to keep going.
Yeah, he actually uses these really vivid phrases to describe it, like wisdom versus worry.
Yeah, and gratitude versus complaining, or faith versus blame.
Yeah, it's almost like a constant internal struggle.
It is, and he's basically saying that the way we choose to frame those experiences, the voice we listen to, that's what shapes how resilient we are.
Okay, but how do we actually do that? How do we tell that negative voice to, shut up and choose that more empowering perspective?
Well, he suggests finding a reason, a why, to keep going. Something that motivates you even when things are tough.
Like what?
It could be your family, it could be your values, maybe even just a personal goal you've set for yourself. It doesn't have to be something huge. Sometimes it's just about getting through the day.
Makes sense.
Yeah.
He gives some pretty specific examples, too.
He does, like battling sickness,
Yeah.
dealing with financial problems, relationship breakdowns. And he even says,
Oh, yeah.
I need you to look at that sickness and say, I can beat it, I will beat it, I must.
It's like a mantra almost.
It is, and while I wouldn't say that mantras alone are the answer, they can be a powerful tool for shifting that inner dialogue and focusing on positive action.
But he also acknowledges that life can be really tough.
Oh, for sure. He doesn't shy away from that at all.
He says, tragedy and trials come to everybody, and only the strong survive. It's kind of like a contradiction to that everyone has what it takes.
Yeah.
Message.
I think he's saying that while we all have the potential for resilience, it's not always easy, and there's a difference between just surviving something and actually thriving because of it.
Yeah, he wants us to learn and grow from those tough times, not just get through them.
Right, and the language he uses to drive that point home is so powerful.
It is. He says things like, show the world what you are really made of, and the fight isn't over, it's just beginning.
It's like he's tapping into our primal instincts to fight for survival.
It's definitely motivating.
Yeah.
And this idea keeps coming up that the only thing that can stop you is you. But for someone who's really struggling with self-doubt or even self-sabotage, that can be a really tough message to hear.
Oh, absolutely. He's not saying we have complete control over everything in our lives, but that we do have control over how we choose to respond to those challenges.
So it's about recognizing those internal battles, like the self-doubt, the limiting beliefs, and then actively choosing to fight against them.
Exactly. He uses this metaphor of standing firm, refusing to retreat in the face of adversity.
Oh, yeah, he actually says, I'm not retreating. I'm not running. We don't retreat. We don't run.
Yeah.
We're going to stand. We're going to live. We're going to die by what we stand for.
It's a powerful image of facing our fears head on.
It's like running away only keeps you stuck. Confronting those challenges is how you take back your power. But how does that actually play out in real life?
Well, think about it. Every time we choose courage over fear, every time we stand our ground instead of shrinking back, we're building that resilience muscle.
So those small everyday acts of courage, they add up to bigger transformations over time.
Exactly. It's not about suddenly becoming fearless. It's about recognizing that you can be afraid and still choose to act.
He also talks about how breaking isn't the end. It's a potential beginning.
Right. He even says it is staying with the breaking that produces the blessing.
That's a deep statement.
It is, but
Yep.
it's also incredibly hopeful. He's suggesting that by leaning into those difficult moments, we create space for something new and positive to emerge.
So we've talked about finding our why, facing our inner battles, choosing to stand strong. But I feel like there's so much more to explore.
There is. We haven't even touched on the other sources you mentioned.
Right. This speech is such a powerful individual perspective.
Hmm.
But I'm curious to hear about those other lenses you mentioned.
Definitely. There are other ways to understand resilience, like looking at the impact of our biology, our social connections, and even the cultural narratives that shape our understanding of what it means to be resilient.
I'm really interested to dive into that.
Me too. I think it'll add a lot of depth to our understanding of resilience.
Okay, so let's shift gears and explore those other perspectives.
Sounds good.
Yeah.
You know, it's fascinating how much this speech focuses on like the individual's mindset and their strength.
Yeah.
But what about all the things going on outside of us that affect how resilient we are?
Right.
You know, the other stuff you shared with me kind of gets into that side of it.
Yeah, this speech is like this awesome pep talk.
Yeah.
But it makes you wonder, like, is that the whole story?
Yeah.
What about our genes or how we were raised or even just the people we're surrounded by?
Totally. It's like that classic nature versus nurture thing.
Right.
The speech is all about nurture, like our choices and how we think about things.
Yeah.
But then there's this whole other nature side of it too, and that's where things get really interesting.
Yeah, you mentioned this thing called epigenetics earlier. Can you
Yeah.
explain that a bit more?
Sure. Think of your genes like a blueprint for who you are.
Okay.
But your experiences can actually change how that blueprint gets used. It's like having a dimmer switch for your genes.
Oh, wow.
Things like trauma or stress or even positive experiences can flip those switches and affect things like your mood, your immune system, even your risk for certain diseases.
So basically, our experiences can actually change our DNA.
Well, not exactly change the DNA itself, but they change how it's read and used by your body. It's a pretty new area of research, but it's showing that resilience isn't just about being mentally tough. It's also tied to these biological processes we're just starting to understand. That's crazy. So even if we're working on our mindset and trying to be positive, there might be these other things going on in our bodies that we don't even realize are affecting how resilient we are.
Yeah, exactly. It's not that mindset isn't important, but it's only one part of a much bigger picture.
So then are some people just born more resilient than others?
It's not that straightforward.
Yeah.
The cool thing about epigenetics is that it shows how much power we still have.
Okay.
Our choices can influence those genetic dimmer switches.
Oh,
Things like exercise mindfulness and even who we hang out with can make a difference.
that makes me think about the community aspect.
Right.
Like this speaker is all about individual strength, but the other stuff I read talks about how important it is to have support from other people.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah.
There's so much research showing that strong social connections are like a superpower for resilience.
Really?
It's not just about having people to complain to when things are rough. It's about feeling like you belong somewhere, like you have a purpose, and that you're not alone in your struggles. Like that saying, if you want to go fast, go alone.
Mm.
If you want to go far, go together.
Yeah, exactly. We're social creatures by nature, and those connections can give us the strength to get through tough times. Throughout history, people have survived and thrived because we work together and support each other.
The speaker keeps talking about standing firm, not retreating.
Right.
But what if standing firm sometimes means asking other people for help?
I love that point. Sometimes the bravest thing you can do is admit you need help and that you can't do it all on your own.
Yeah.
And being vulnerable like that can actually make our connections stronger and make us more resilient.
So it's like he's saying, don't retreat from the battle, but maybe the battle plan involves getting back up.
I like that. It's not just you against the world,
Okay.
It's about working together, and that's where the social and cultural sides of resilience are so important.
We also haven't talked about how our ideas about resilience might have changed over time. It seems like something that would evolve as we learn more about psychology and stuff.
Yeah, absolutely. Historically, resilience was all about being tough and not showing your emotions, that whole pull yourself up by your bootstraps mentality.
Yeah.
But now we understand that there are bigger things at play that can either help or hurt people's ability to be resilient.
What do you mean?
I'm talking about things like how much money you have access to healthcare education, even whether you face discrimination or trauma. These things can make it really hard for someone to be resilient, no matter how strong their mindset is.
So it's not just about personal strength.
Yeah.
It's also about realizing that some people have it way harder than others.
Exactly. To really be resilient, we need to work together to make things fairer for everyone.
It's like you keep saying the only thing that can stop you is you.
Right.
But maybe it's more like the only thing that can stop us is us. Like we need to work together to break down the things that are holding people back.
That's such a good point.
Yeah.
It's about taking responsibility together, not just individually.
It's been a crazy journey so far.
I know.
We started with this powerful message about one person overcoming challenges.
Yeah.
And now we're talking about how our biology, our social support, and even the culture we live in all play a role.
And it doesn't stop there.
Oh, no.
We also need to think about the stories we tell ourselves about resilience, you know? The heroes we look up to and the values we believe in. They all shape how we think about what it means to be resilient.
Okay, so we've covered the biological, the social, the historical.
Right.
Now, what about these stories? How do they affect our resilience?
Think about the typical stories we hear about resilience.
Like what?
The entrepreneur who becomes a millionaire, the athlete who comes back from a terrible injury, the person who survives something awful and comes out stronger. Those stories can be inspiring, but they can also set unrealistic expectations.
So it's not just about telling ourselves positive stories.
Yeah.
It's also about looking at the stories we hear from society and deciding if they're actually helpful or not.
Exactly. We need to realize that resilience isn't one size fits all. It looks different for everyone, and it depends on our experiences, our culture, and even our biology.
This deep dive has taken us everywhere.
I know, it's been quite a ride.
We started with the individual,
Mhm.
then zoomed out to the big picture, and now we're looking at the stories we tell.
It's like we've gone from a close-up shot to a wide-angle view of what resilience really means.
But with all this information, where do we go from here? How do we take all this and actually use it in our own lives?
That's the million-dollar question, and it takes us to the final part of our deep dive.
Okay.
We've explored all the different pieces of the puzzle. Now let's see how they all fit together to help us understand resilience in a deeper way.
Okay, so we've covered so much ground.
I know, right?
From that speaker's call for inner strength
Yeah.
to the way our genes and our social connections, even the stories we tell ourselves about resilience all play a part.
Right.
It's like peeling back layers of an onion.
It is. And like an onion, there might be some tears along the way as we confront the tougher parts of resilience.
Absolutely. But I have to admit, it's a little overwhelming. With all of these different factors at play, where do we even start with building resilience in our own lives?
That's where I think the speaker's message, even though it focuses a lot on individual strength, is still really helpful.
Okay.
Remember how he emphasized finding your why? That reason to keep going?
Yeah.
That's a powerful starting point no matter what else is going on.
So even though we've talked about all these outside influences, it still comes back to that inner drive, that choice to keep going.
Exactly. Think of it this way. You've got your core motivation, your why, and then you build resilience around it by using everything you have available to you, like your support system, understanding your own biology, and even being aware of those cultural stories that might be holding you back.
It's like that unbroken image the speaker keeps using. Maybe it's not about never going through tough times, but about having a strong foundation that can bend without breaking, that can adapt and grow when things get really hard.
That's a great way to put it. It makes me think of kintsugi, the Japanese art of repairing broken pottery with gold.
I've heard of that.
Instead of trying to hide the cracks, they actually highlight them with gold. It makes the piece even more beautiful because of its imperfections.
I love that. It's like our struggles and the times we've been broken become part of our story. Proof of our resilience,
Right.
not something we need to be ashamed of or try to erase.
Exactly. And that reminds me of something you said earlier about those cultural narratives around resilience. We often celebrate the people who seem to bounce back easily.
Yeah.
But in reality, being resilient is often messy and full of setbacks and times when we feel vulnerable.
So maybe it's not about bouncing back so much as embracing the ups and downs of the journey.
I think so. Resilience isn't a straight line. It's a winding path with unexpected twists and turns. And sometimes it's about recognizing when we need to pause, rest, and recharge before we can keep going.
That's such an important point. The speaker talks about standing firm, but sometimes standing firm might mean asking for help, getting support, or even taking a step back to figure out a new approach.
Absolutely. And that's where understanding the social, the biological, and the cultural aspects of resilience can be so helpful. It gives us more tools and more options to explore as we figure out our own unique path.
So to bring it all home for our listeners, what would you say is the biggest takeaway from this deep dive?
I think it's this. Resilience isn't a finish line. It's an ongoing process of growing and adapting. It's about understanding all the different things that affect our ability to cope with challenges and then using that knowledge to build a more resilient life.
And it's about remembering that resilience isn't one size fits all. It's about finding what works for you, embracing your own journey, and celebrating those golden cracks that make you who you are.
Beautifully said. And here's a final thought for our listeners. What does being unbroken actually mean to you? Is it about never facing hardship? Or is it about having the inner strength, the resources, and the self-awareness to face those challenges head on and come out stronger on the other side? Thanks for joining us.
And thanks for listening.